When we're kids, we're taught that adults will always protect us. That family is the safest place in the world. That if something bad ever happens, just speak up and someone will help. But what happens when the only people who can help choose to look away? Today's story isn't fiction. This is one of those true Reddit stories that chills you to the core. Not because of ghosts or monsters, but because of people. A young girl abandoned with a troubled uncle, a little sister who vanishes without explanation, and an entire community that decides to stay silent. Think you know the truth? Wait until the very end, because the twist in this story is one not everyone is ready to hear. Chapter 1, he left us and walked away like nothing happened. I remember the day my dad dropped me and my little sister off at Uncle Gary's house with terrifying clarity. We stood on the cold front steps, each with a backpack. He pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket, just a few phone numbers scribbled in pen, handed it to me, and said, "Call one of these if you need anything." "What about you, Dad?" I asked. He looked me dead in the eyes, unblinking. "You'll be fine, as long as you don't bother your uncle." Then he got into his car, shut the door, and drove away like he'd just taken out the trash. Except it wasn't garbage. It was his two children. I was 13, Juliet was 8, and that was the last day I ever referred to anything as family. Uncle Gary was a huge man with eyes that looked like they could cut through skin. No hello, no hugs. He just stood there with his arms crossed, scanning us from head to toe like he was inspecting a package he didn't order. One he didn't even care to unwrap. His house was dark. The walls were old stained wood, and the air reeked of stale cigarettes. He laid down the rules quickly. We were never to enter his room, never touch anything in the fridge without asking, and never, absolutely never make a sound while he was watching TV. Juliet gripped my hand so tightly, her tiny fingers were soaked in sweat. She had never been away from Mom before, or more accurately, she'd never been discarded like this. I didn't know what I was waiting for. A phone call from Dad, a text, an apology, nothing came. The days that followed were just a blur of silence, control, and fear. It hit me slowly, but surely this wasn't temporary. No one was coming to pick us up. No one asked if we were okay. My father had truly abandoned us. What made it worse was realizing that everyone around us knew. They knew who Gary was. They knew his past. But no one warned us. No one stepped in. No one said a word. And somehow, that terrified me more than Gary ever did. Chapter 2. Everyone knew, but no one said a word. During the first few days at Uncle Gary's house, I kept trying to convince myself that maybe he was just strict. But then I realized no, he was a terrible man. And worse than that, everyone around us seemed to know it. The neighbors never stopped to talk when they saw Juliet and me out in the yard. They'd glance over with pity in their eyes, then quietly look away. My teacher, Ms. Monroe, used to be a friend of my mom's. She looked at me with something strange in her eyes. Not sympathy, not curiosity, just a kind of conflicted silence, like she was hiding something she couldn't say out loud. One day I took a risk and asked her, "You know what's happening, don't you?" She didn't answer right away. Her lips pressed into a tight line. Then she whispered like she was afraid of even hearing herself. "You just need to try not to make him angry." I shivered, not because of what she said, but because of how she said it. Like those words had once been told to her. Or maybe once upon a time she'd said them to herself. Juliet grew quieter by the day. She stopped chatting about school, stopped hugging me in the mornings like she used to. She flinched at loud noises. She jumped when someone touched her shoulder. One night I woke up and found her curled up in the corner of the room, wide-eyed, whispering, "Don't leave me here alone. Please don't leave me." All I could do was pull her into my arms, letting the tears fall silently, because even crying out loud felt too dangerous. I started calling the numbers Dad had given me, hotline, social services, even our former mom. But most of them never picked up. Chapter 3, The Cold Answer from the Man I Once Called. Dad, I used to think that if I just tried hard enough, Dad would come back. I kept calling the numbers he gave us every single day. Sometimes I used the payphone outside the corner store, other times I'd sneak Gary's phone when he was asleep. But most of the time, all I got was the long, empty drone of a dial tone. Only once, just once, did he actually pick up. His voice came through the line, tired, annoyed, like I'd just interrupted a luxurious vacation he never told us about. I swallowed hard, heart pounding, and said, "Dad, Juliet's in the hospital. He hit her. Her head's all swollen. Please, can you come get a silence?" I thought maybe he was in shock, or maybe he was driving, or maybe he was about to say, "I'm on my way." But instead he sighed and replied, "Cold as ice. You kids always exaggerate." I froze. "Dad, did you see the photos I sent you, pictures of Juliet's bruised, swollen head? Please, I'm begging you, we don't want to be here anymore." "Enough," he cut me off. "You've always been like this, making up stories. I told you not to bother him. If you behave, you'll be fine." Then he hung up. I stood there with the receiver still in my hand, unable to process what I'd just heard. No promise, no concern for Juliet, not even an apology. I went back to the hospital. Juliet was sleeping, her arm bandaged, knees scraped. One of the nurses asked if I wanted to speak to a social worker. I just shook my head. Because what would be the point? Because I already knew no one was going to help us. No one wanted to deal with someone else's mess. And the one person who was supposed to protect us had turned his back long ago. From that moment on, I officially gave up the idea that I still had a family. Chapter 4, Lies Told as Truth. After that phone call, I stopped calling my dad. I stopped believing that any adult was going to save us. I went back to school like a walking corpse. Juliet still went too, but she wasn't the same little girl who used to laugh and talk all the time. One day she burst into tears when a classmate accidentally bumped her into a wall. Another day she spent hours in the bathroom, refusing to come out because she was scared he's in the hallway. I started writing everything down. Every bruise, every threat. Every time Uncle Gary slammed the door and made me sit silently for hours without dinner. I didn't know why I was doing it. Maybe it was just to prove I wasn't crazy, that what we were going through was real, that I wasn't making things up like my dad used to say. One day, the school held a parent-teacher conference. No one came for Juliet or me. I had hoped just this once that Dad might show up. But instead, when the teacher asked me if I was okay, I forced a stiff smile and said, "Yes, I'm fine. Everything's normal at home." I heard myself lie, and I hated myself for it. But I also understood why I did it. Because I had seen grown-ups do the same thing. I had heard neighbors tell the police they didn't hear anything. I had watched a nurse hand Juliet a lollipop instead of asking why a child had a broken arm. I saw teachers look down at their desks when I tried to speak up, then quickly change the subject to math homework. Everyone knew, but they chose not to know. And slowly, I learned how to be silent too. But I swear, even if I couldn't speak, then I would remember everything. And someday I would tell it all. No more pretending, no more politeness, no more fear of being called the kid who exaggerates. The truth deserves to be told. Chapter 5. When I realized adults don't forget, they choose to look away. I used to think maybe the adults just didn't realize, that they were too busy too, caught up in their own lives to notice what was happening to Juliet and me. But I was wrong. One winter morning, I got to school earlier than usual and happened to overhear a conversation between two teachers in the faculty lounge, the door left slightly ajar. One of them whispered, "That girl, Juliet." "Something happened again," the other replied. "Yeah, she came in yesterday with a bruise on her wrist. The principal said not to interfere since there's legal guardianship paperwork from the father. I held my breath. It wasn't that they didn't know. They did. They knew about every bruise, every time Juliet flinched in class. They just chose not to get involved. Just like the neighbor who once handed me a loaf of bread when I was scavenging for food behind the dumpster. She said, "I know it's not easy living with him, but you should be obedient. Don't make trouble. Don't make trouble." What about me? When Juliet was sick? When I had to skip school to stay home and care for her because he was off somewhere gone all day unreachable? When I used toothpaste to soothe her bruises because we didn't have ointment? Was that what obedience looked like? And my father, the man who dropped his children off in hell and walked away, he was living in another city with a new family, a Facebook account full of vacation photos, and no one knew, or maybe no one cared to say that he had abandoned his own kids. Our story, Juliet's and mine, was never told. Instead, they told the version that was easier to digest. A struggling single dad asking his brother for help with the kids. They're rough. That's why they get hurt. What they need is discipline, not sympathy. They twisted the truth into something easier to swallow. Not because they were blind, but because they didn't want to feel guilty. I remember the look in my teacher's eyes the day Juliet cried in front of the whole class after another student yanked her backpack. That empty, checked-out look like Juliet wasn't even a student, just an inconvenient shadow in the room. That's when I understood adults don't forget. They just choose to look away. Because if they didn't, they'd have to do something. And that's just too inconvenient. Chapter 6. Juliet disappeared, and no one asked why Juliet wasn't herself anymore. She didn't smile. She didn't talk to anyone but me. She didn't draw. Didn't sing in the bathroom like she used to. She just sat there staring out the window like she was waiting for someone to come save her, and already knew no one would. And then one day, Juliet didn't go to school. I thought maybe she had a cold. But when I asked, Uncle Gary just glared at me and said, "She messed up. She needs to be locked up to learn how to behave." Locked up. In that tiny attic room with no windows and a lock on the outside. She stayed in there for 3 days. No light. No proper food. Just a bucket to use as a toilet, and the pounding of rock music blasting from downstairs until it made your skull throb. At night, I snuck her water, but I couldn't unlock the door. All I could do was press my ear to it and listen to her sobbing. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to break the glass." I wanted to scream, to break the door down, to do something. But I was scared. I was only 13, and I knew if I stepped out of line, I'd be the next one locked away. On the 4th day, Juliet was gone. Gary said she was sent to stay with a friend for a while to learn how to be a better person. But no one knew the friend's name. No address. No one had ever seen her again after that. I asked my dad. He texted back. Just one line: she needed discipline. "Your sister will be fine." Fine, my sister, an 8-year-old girl who was afraid of the dark, who couldn't sleep without her bear-shaped nightlight, was sent away. And no one bothered to confirm a thing. I asked the teacher. She said Juliet transferred schools right. We got her transcript withdrawal form. I asked the neighbors. They shrugged. Haven't seen the little one in a while. Maybe went off on vacation. Vacation. Juliet wasn't on vacation. She was gone. And the world just kept turning like nothing ever happened. I started dreaming about her every night. Sometimes she stood at the foot of my bed, hair-tangled hands covered in blood, asking, "Why didn't you open the door?" And I had no answer. Chapter 7, everyone told me to move on. I started looking for her instead. After Juliet disappeared, everything became eerily quiet. No more soft footsteps on the creaky wooden floor in the mornings. No more of her whispering, "Do we need to skip breakfast again today?" No trace of her existence remained except for me. Uncle Gary acted like Juliet had never been here. The attic room where she'd been locked up was permanently shut. I once tried to find the key, but he guarded it, like his wallet always in the pocket of his coat. He told the neighbors she'd been adopted by a good family, told the school she transferred, told me stop bothering people by digging up the past. But how could I dig up the past when I didn't even know how it ended? So I started documenting everything I knew. Every detail, every word Uncle Gary said, every unanswered call to my father. Every time I saw Gary pull out his phone and text someone right after Juliet's name came up, I started checking the mailbox in secret. One day I found a letter from a youth support center. I opened it. Inside was a health report, Juliet's regular wellness checkup. But the recipient's name was someone I didn't know. A woman, living in a town over 200 kilometers away. I tucked the letter into my backpack. No one could know I was following the breadcrumbs. I began learning how to use payphones, how to mail letters without anyone finding out. I was 13, but at that point I felt older than anyone in school. And most importantly, I started believing in myself. No one else was going to look for Juliet. No one else remembered her as a real person, only as a name on a transfer form. Everyone told me I should let it go. She's probably fine by now. That's not your responsibility anymore. You need to focus on your future. But what future did I have? If I let the past slip away, like Juliet never existed, I made a promise to myself. No matter how long it took, no matter what anyone said, I would find Juliet. Chapter 8. The Letter Back, and a name I'd never heard before I wrote that letter with every last ounce of desperation and hope I had left. I tore out a sheet from an old math notebook, carefully writing each word, masking my trembling hand by darkening key sentences. I didn't sign my real name. I just wrote, "My sister is missing. I believe she may be with you. Please confirm." I addressed it to the name of the strange woman listed on Juliet's medical report. Then I biked over 4 kilometers to the farthest public mailbox I knew of and dropped it in. And I waited. Every day, every hour. 3 weeks later, a letter with no return address appeared in our mailbox. The handwriting was shaky, no punctuation, but just clear enough for me to realize someone had read my message. "I don't know who you are, but the girl talks in her sleep. She says sister. Her real name isn't Juliet. She doesn't talk much, but she has a scar on her leg. If she's who you're looking for, you need to come before it's too late." I read the line "before it's too late" at least 10 times. Each time my chest tightened a little more. I knew I couldn't do anything reckless. I couldn't tell Uncle Gary. I couldn't call my dad. I needed money. I needed a map. I needed a plan. And I needed an adult. The only adult I still trusted at that point was Ms. Eileen, the librarian at the town library. She was the one who let Juliet and me stay and read all afternoon, even when the library was about to close. The one who once brought me a cup of hot cocoa when I was crying silently in the corner missing my mom. The only adult who had ever asked me, "Are you really okay?" I brought her the letter. I didn't say a word. I just held it out and waited. Ms. Eileen finished reading it. She didn't ask a single question. She just said, "You've got a week off for midterm break. Let me buy the bus ticket." And I cried, because for the first time in what felt like forever, an adult chose to believe me. Chapter 9. The Night Bus and the Town, where everyone avoided my eyes. I can still remember the smell of that old night bus, sun-baked faux leather mingled with mosquito coils, and the cold chicken sandwich from the passenger next to me. I clutched my backpack to my chest the entire ride, like it was the only armor I had. Ms. Eileen bought the ticket under her name. She told me not to talk to anyone. She went over every stop, every landmark. She even printed out a map from the library's computer and circled the destination in Red Wendell, a town I'd never even heard of before. The trip took nearly 6 hours. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I stared out the window the whole time, memorizing road signs, intersections, gas stations, just in case. I had to run. When I stepped off the bus in Wendell, the sun hadn't fully risen yet. The town was so small, I felt like I could spin in a circle and see the entire thing. Low-roofed houses, tilted telephone poles, one convenience store still open flickering with tired neon lights. I walked to the address from the letter. A weathered wooden house, creaky porch steps, and a no visitors sign flipped upside down by the wind. The door opened before I could knock. A pale, gaunt woman with platinum hair and sunken eyes stared down at me. She didn't ask my name. She just nodded and stepped aside like she'd been waiting. "She's upstairs," she said, her voice like smoke and exhaustion, "but don't expect to get back the same Juliet you lost." I stepped inside. Every footstep echoed like a drum inside my chest. Creaking wooden stairs, a narrow hallway, and finally, the last room. The door was cracked open. I pushed it gently, and I saw her curled up in the corner, eyes empty, face thin, hair jagged and uneven, chopped short. But it was Juliet, my sister. She was alive. I opened my mouth, my voice cracked. "Juliet!" She looked up. For one fleeting second, her eyes flickered recognition, and then she broke down. No sound, just tears. I ran to her, held her. For the first time in almost a year, I got to touch her, really touch her. Not in dreams, not in aching silence. We sat there holding each other on the cold, wooden floor. No one said a word. No words were needed. I had found Juliet, but I also knew this was just the beginning of a much bigger fight. Chapter 10. The Things. Juliet whispered. And the truth that made me lose faith in adults. Juliet slept for nearly 12 hours after I arrived. The platinum-haired woman, her name was Marla, only said one thing before leaving me alone with my sister. "She's never been much of a talker, but she dreams every night. You should be prepared." I sat beside the bed, watching Juliet curled up beneath a worn-out blanket. The room held almost nothing, a wooden wardrobe with a broken hinge, a flickering nightlight, and a doll missing its eyes. She didn't seem locked up, but she definitely wasn't free. When she finally woke, I handed her a sandwich I'd bought at the bus station. She looked at me long and hard before tremblingly taking it like she was scared I might vanish again if she blinked. I started telling her everything about the old house, about Ms. Eileen, about the letter she once wrote, the one I'd kept in my wallet for a year. She listened, nodded, but barely spoke, until nightfall. That's when Juliet whispered, "Do you remember the first day we moved in with Uncle Gary?" I nodded. I heard him say to Dad, "As long as the little one doesn't open her mouth, I'm in the clear." My stomach dropped. Juliet continued, voice so soft I had to hold my breath to hear, "I think they sent me away because I knew too much. I don't remember everything, but I remember rope. I remember the smell of blood, and that little bell you used to hang in your room. One time I saw it on Uncle Gary's wrist." I couldn't speak. There was nothing left to deny. All the times Juliet trembled, all the nightmares, all the whispers of footsteps in the night. They all had a reason. Not because she was sensitive, not because she had an overactive imagination, but because something horrible had happened. And my father knew. I asked Juliet why she didn't say anything when they took her away. She lowered her head. "Because I thought you left me." That sentence. It shattered something in me. I held her tighter than I ever had. Swore I would never leave her again. But when I looked over, Marla was standing in the doorway. She'd been there the whole time. And in her eyes, I saw something I didn't want to admit. The truth we'd just uncovered was only the tip of the iceberg. And if I was ever going to bring Juliet back, really bring her back, if we were going to escape this for good, I would have to confront the people who had buried the truth for years. Chapter 11, if you know what's good for you, you'll leave the girl here. That night, I didn't sleep. Juliet whispered broken memories into my ear about rope, about the sound of doors locking, about waking up in the middle of the night and seeing Uncle Gary standing in her doorway. with eyes that didn't belong to a normal man. I sat beside her, clutching her hand, silently building a plan in my head. I had to get Juliet out. Immediately. The next morning, I snuck to the convenience store at the edge of town and used a prepaid phone to call Eileen. I kept my voice low, nearly cracking. I found Juliet. But she's not okay. I need help. Eileen paused for a moment, then said firmly, "Listen to me. Don't leave her side. I'll come get you. But don't let anyone know." I nodded even though she couldn't see. I bought a few small things to avoid suspicion and made my way back. But as I stepped onto the porch, Marla was already there waiting. Her eyes weren't kind anymore. "Who'd you call?" she asked bluntly. I stammered, said it was just a friend. But she smirked. "You think you're smarter than the adults around here? You think she's going to be rescued? You don't understand what's protecting her." I felt a chill down my spine. "If you know what's good for you," she said, "you'll leave the girl here. Here. At least she's alive." I stepped back. "Here," I said. "You call this safe?" Marla didn't answer. She stared at me for a long moment, then turned and walked back inside. That night I woke Juliet. I whispered, "Do you trust me?" She nodded. We packed what little we had into a backpack. I took the map, the remaining money, and the old doll Juliet refused to leave behind. We crept downstairs step by step. But just as we reached the front door, a voice echoed from the shadows. "Where are you going this late, Uncle Gary?" He stood right in front of us, thinner, more gray in his hair, but those eyes, I recognized them instantly. "Your dad said you'd come back," he growled. "Didn't think you were this stupid." I stepped in front of Juliet. "If you touch her, I'll scream. The whole town will hear me." He scoffed. "The whole town already heard." "And what did they do?" I looked down the road. Headlights were approaching. I screamed with everything I had. "Eileen, fire, fire!" The headlights sped up. A car screeched to a stop. Eileen threw open the door. I grabbed Juliet's hand. We ran. Uncle Gary lunged, grabbed my arm, but Juliet did something I never expected. She slammed her doll into his face. He stumbled back, and we jumped into the car. Eileen hit the gas. I looked into the rearview mirror, saw Uncle Gary shrinking into the darkness, howling like a wounded animal. We left Wendell behind. But I knew this wasn't over. They wouldn't let us go so easily. Juliet had survived. But now it was my turn to fight for the truth. Chapter 12, The Truth, and Those Who Chose to Stay Silent. We didn't go home right away. Eileen took us to a small town far enough that no one would recognize Juliet or me. We stayed in the cottage of one of her old friends, a woman who had once escaped a cult, someone who understood what it felt like when everyone around you knew but pretended not to see. Juliet slept a lot. Some days she wouldn't get out of bed, but at least she was sleeping in a room where the lock was on the inside. As for me, I started writing. I wrote everything down. The bruises, the strange looks, the half-spoken whispers, the times Juliet cried silently when she woke up, the things I thought I had imagined, but turned out to be real. Eileen told me, when you have nothing else left, the truth is the most powerful thing you've got. We found a lawyer, a child protection agency. We filed a report. At times it felt like no one believed us, until Juliet agreed to speak. She told her story, into a recorder, through my tears, and in front of the stunned faces of former neighbors, teachers, and all those who had once known Uncle Gary. They knew, they had heard, they had seen the signs, but they chose silence because it was a family matter, because they didn't want to get involved, because you can't report something if you're not sure. They weren't convicted, but they'll carry that shame forever. As for Uncle Gary, he was finally arrested, not for abusing Juliet, but for possession of illegal material and the abuse of a child he thought was missing. The case expanded. 2 more children came forward. One was still in Marla's so-called homeschool program. The other had run away and was never found. Juliet stayed silent at the sentencing. She just gripped my hand tightly as if to say, "I'm here. I survived." 3 years later, Juliet is now studying art. She's not the girl who always kept her head down anymore. She looks people in the eye, she speaks up. Some nights she still has nightmares, but every time she wakes up and knows she's safe. Me, I'm writing all of this in my application to law school because I never want another child to live like Juliet did. I never want anyone to say the words, I knew. But I didn't think it was that serious. We're moving forward, not because the past no longer hurts, but because the truth has been named. And that is the only place healing can begin. If you're hearing this story and see yourself in it, or see someone who's isolated someone sending signals no one wants to notice, please don't stay silent. Because sometimes all it takes is one person who believes you to survive. You've just heard one of the most heartbreaking stories, not because of what happened, but because of how many people knew and did nothing. If you ever see something that doesn't feel right, don't pretend you didn't see it. If someone tells you they're scared, that they're in pain, that they need help, believe them, even just a little, because sometimes one person who listens, one person who believes, can be the only reason someone survives. You can share this video, not for the algorithm, but because somewhere out there someone needs to hear this story to know they're not alone.